Nik Ehlers is going to test free agency on July 1st, but that may not be the end of his saga with the Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, there is a lot to talk about. The free agent market continues to evolve, and, of course, the Jets have a big one who is now going to test free agency per Elliot Friedman. The Ehlers' impact and his loss, if it does happen, could be very big, but it may not be the end of his saga here in Winnipeg. There's a lot to talk through, and some other free agents may have a big bearing on what happens with Slick Nick. Of course, one of those free agents is Mitch Marner. Want to chat about his potential transfer to another team, and also some good Jets news for one of our young prospects. Alfons Freij has signed his ELC. So exciting times ahead for the Jets' younger players, but of course the current core is dealing and grappling with the potential departure of Nik Ehlers. This is a big one, right? We've talked a lot about Ehlers over the years. You know I'm a big fan. I know a lot of you do like him. Some of you are a little more pessimistic on his game than I am. And he's always been one of those players who gives you a lot more than he gives up. People often kind of focus on the turnovers and stuff, which is partly because he just does so much to try and create offense. There's really not many players on this team who have possession as much as he does. Because he tries to create so much, sometimes he gets a little overambitious, but his overall transition work, his creativity, his skill, all that stuff makes him one of the most dynamic attacking forwards in the league. When you look at his 5v5 scoring rates per 60 minutes, he actually ranks in the top 10 of the entire NHL. This list includes guys like McKinnon, McDavid, you name it, they're on it. So relative to his ice time, he's producing 5v5 points at an absurd rate. He's like ninth or so on the list, which is still incredible, right? All this while he's actually playing something like 14 to 16 minutes a night. Really not that much. And the thing with with him and how he's played usually is because oftentimes he short shifts, but I really feel like you should just double shift Ehlers more. I feel like there are very simple solutions to the way that the Jets occasionally have some interesting ice time and deployment splits. They haven't really gone that route yet, so we'll see if that changes in the future. But as far as Ehlers is concerned, he is going to be one of the hottest names on the market. Mitch Marner will be the first free agent that's really going to set the tone. And what's curious about all of this is Ehlers is the number 2, but I don't really know how teams look at him, right? Nick has missed a fair few number of games over the years. Last year was his first 82-game season in forever, maybe ever. I don't know if he's actually had an 82-game season before this one. I can't recall. Usually he does miss time. And so when he finally has a full healthy one, it's a minor miracle. Now, some of the recent seasons have also been cut short due to COVID, so that's something to factor in a little bit. But having Nick in your team is just a blessing. And this year, his power play work really put him on, I would say, the score sheet map. Traditionally, he's been, 60 points in maybe 80-ish or 70-ish games. This year, he was basically a point-per-game pace, and it was only held back by the fact that he got hurt for a decent chunk of the season, and so he missed 15, 20 games. That had a pretty noticeable impact on his final season tallies, and all of that just makes me wonder what his next contract is going to be like. I have a feeling the Jets are not going to offer him as much money as other teams might. Nick, unfortunately, has been underutilized by Winnipeg in a lot of ways. And it wasn't until this season that they tried to adjust and correct that to a point. Still not 100% there, but better than it was in previous years. The usage of him on the power play and the way that he's completely transformed the 5v4 unit is really notable. He was kind of your roaming destroyer, creator, sort of all over player. He could do almost anything. And, I think Davis Payne is going to have a really hard time figuring out who else can do the kind of stuff that Nik does. I didn't really expect him to deploy Ehlers as sort of the roaming, rotating forward in and out of positions. It actually worked an incredible treat. I don't know how Payne figured this one out, but it made that power play one of the best in the league. That versatility and that danger and threat really gave so many other opportunities for guys like Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde. So that's, obviously a big asset that he has added and will surely show other teams that, you can put Ehlers on the first power play unit, and he's probably going to do something fun if you have the right tactical system to match. Elsewhere, the 5v5 impact is a thing, but because he's missed games and because he doesn't quite have the scoring repertoire of a lot of other players, I kind of feel like he gets capped at like 8 or 8.5 million. I'm curious to know who out there would offer more. With the Marner negotiations likely pushing into McDavid money, the number 2 on the market has room to go up. I wonder with Nik, right? And I kind of feel like at the end of all of this, the chance that he comes back would really depend on what other teams out there are offering decent money. If the Jets kind of give a fair offer that's pretty in line with other teams, I wonder if the incentive is just to stick in Winnipeg, right? You have a fairly decent chance to get through to deeper rounds in the Western Conference. I have a feeling this offseason is going to be a lot more active than we've seen from the Jets. I know a lot of you are usually a little less optimistic in the comments. I feel like it's going to change this year. Something feels a little bit different in the waters for Winnipeg. I just have a sense that, this summer's going to be a more active pattern than we're used to. Partly by necessity, but partly because I just think that there's real pressure now from the front office to start making some real changes and moves. This team got as far as it could with the way that it's built, but I have a feeling that they're not satisfied yet. So Ehlers could be in maybe the better position. The teams that would make use of him, I could imagine Toronto, Carolina, most of the league, right? I've talked about Utah being a fit. Vegas kind of sits out there to me. The Knights haven't really been discussed a lot recently, but there is kind of a nightmare scenario where I do envision him in a Golden Knights uniform. I don't know how the money would work, and I think that there would be some real challenges to make that happen. But, this is a team that did try to acquire, I think it was either Marner or Ronton, and I'm pretty sure it was Marner in like a 3-way trade. So I wouldn't rule them out. They could be in on one of these big names. And if Marner goes to another team, that instantly makes Ehlers one of the most desirable targets. And, there could be other teams, even in the Central, that are eyeing up a Nik Ehlers. Really, half the league, if not more, is going to be interested here. I just question how much money is going to take to get him to move out of Winnipeg. The Jets, I hope they don't lowball him. I know that that's something that's part of the negotiating process, and it happens. But if you're really serious about keeping Ehlers and you want to make him an offer that he really can't, or really shouldn't refuse, this is probably your last chance. But he is going to test free agency on July 1st. Not really surprising. I just wonder, once he does the survey, he gets the offers out there, is Winnipeg his best landing spot? I feel like sometimes the comfortable and familiar might end up being the best decision, but the ball's in his court. I know why he would want to leave. I can't blame him for it. This one is kind of on Winnipeg, but maybe, just maybe, there's still time to salvage the situation. But of course, we're going to keep a very close eye on that. And all of this kind of feeds into the bigger free agent market right now that's continuing to evolve, continues to see lots of rumors out there. The biggest one, though, is Mitch Marner, and he's going to completely transform the landscape of the free agent market for pretty much every team once somebody out there signs him. I want to chat about why and what it could mean for Ehlers and company in just a brief second. Ever check your bank account and wonder where the heck all your money went? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I found out that I was wasting a lot more money on streaming services than I realized. All those Winnipeg Jets streams and let's be honest, our multimedia streaming platforms, it gets expensive, right? And Monarch Money is an all-in-one super convenient app that also allows you to share with your partner or spouse so that you can always stay up to date on all of the financial developments in your accounting system, and also helps you set goals so that you're always on the same page. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about the upcoming Mitch Marner deal, which is going to be one of the biggest free agent moves we've seen in years. I guess the last big one maybe was also kind of like John Tavares. I'm trying to think of what other really, really massive free agents have signed mega contracts, and at the scale that we're about to see with Marner, I don't know that anyone else really comes close. He is one of the most expensive and most hotly desired players on the market. You know, you're talking about a 100-point player. Those kinds of wingers really don't come up. They don't move. Obviously, with Marner, there's been some interesting chatter. Now, I can tell you right now he's not coming to Winnipeg, and, you know, for a lot of reasons, I really wouldn't want that anyways. Marner's very skilled. He's a great player. I just feel like with what happened in the postseason and his reaction in some of the games to how the Leafs were playing, I felt like there was maybe a lack of self-reflection in some of those moments. The frustration's naturally going to boil up and boil over, but I just feel like Marner was also a part of that problem. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. But as far as what he's asking for, rumor has it we're talking in the $14 million range, which that's McDavid money, right? And look, the market has changed a lot since, you know, League Max was signed back in those days. So, you know, you can't really lean on that. But we are talking in that price range. And Marner, for me, is an extremely good finisher. He's just not a $14 million kind of player to me. Now, that could very well change with the new cap and what we see new contracts being signed for, but we're hearing Carolina's willing to go over that, like 14 and a half plus, which is, for me, just crazy. I look at Marner as a very, very good elite top six winger. I really don't think that there's any question of that, but we're talking 14 mil, man. I don't see it, to be honest. And I think he could become one of the best finishers the Canes have ever had. So that's certainly a thing. But, you know, if you look at the other free agents out there, no one else is really in that price range. And it's kind of why I've had issues trying to figure out, you know, how much does Ehlers' market really go up once Marner signed, right? Does he really make that much more money off of the Marner negotiations? If we already know what Mitch is making, which is 14 plus, you know, how much more can Nik actually get in negotiations, especially when his track record is just nowhere close to what Marner already has on paper? So it's an interesting thing. The real trick of all of this, though, is that wherever Marner goes, immediately that is one of the biggest destinations for an Ehlers or somebody else of that caliber off the table, right? And that narrows the number of teams that are going to be good winning destinations for Nik. So if Marner signs for Carolina, I kind of felt like Tulsky would have been one of the clearest fans of Nik. Honestly, I thought Ehlers was going to be a Kane for the most part if he goes out east, right? I don't know that there are many other teams where I would imagine he'd be a great fit right off the bat, and that could actually afford whatever he's asking for. In terms of, you know, other teams that Nik could go to, I mean, if you're looking at good destinations where he could win, Dallas could be a thing if they try to clear out a bunch of salary. They've got their own issues, though, with Robertson, and it seems like they're trying to move that money before they trade Robertson, which is pretty much what I think a lot of us expected, but it's just kind of like actually moving that money that's already on the books is easier said than done when it's guys like Matt Dumba and Ilya Lyubushkin. So, not so great for them. Elsewhere, though, Utah continues to be one of those teams that I'm sort of wondering about. Maybe Tampa Bay, if they can ever, unscrew their cap situation. But it's hard to really find many places that are A, willing to sign a big player like this, and B, have the cap room to really pull it off, and are also good. A lot of the teams that do have cap room are not really big winners, right? Unless you're talking about a Chicago where they might try to really woo Nick with a big $10 million contract. I just don't know how many destinations out there that are, you know, available and willing to sign him are actually good. There's just not that many teams. And when you think about Brad Marchand, who's also probably about to get a nice fat contract somewhere, it's just there's a really big competitive market for a lot of these wingers. And I feel like Ehlers, he's probably one of the best, or at least should be one of the most hotly desired names, but I wonder how desirable it's really going to be. Recency bias is a thing. Marchand's ripping it up in the playoffs. Maybe all that kind of puts Ehlers a little bit further on the back burner and perhaps plays into Winnipeg's hands. So all of this could be a really good thing for the Jets. If Winnipeg ends up being the team that can make the best offer and be the best fit, then Ehlers doesn't really need to move. But I think that's a bigger conversation with his agent and probably with the Jets front office, right? I don't think he hates being here. I don't think it's really that. I just think he's kind of lost a lot of money. That's a real thing. The Jets have, because they've deployed him the way that they've, done so over the years, they've probably knocked out about a good $10 million in potential earnings from him. So that's a little hard to get past, even for players who really enjoy staying in a city and playing for a team. That wasn't his choice. He wasn't asking to not play, elevated minutes, right? So it's a tricky, delicate situation, but I am hopeful that they can kind of figure it out. At the end of the day, if he does leave, I'll always remember him fondly. He was a great player, but all I can hope for is that this free agent market is going to go nuts, that all these teams that are looking to bring in a big name player make other commitments elsewhere, maybe even make some bad decisions that benefit the Jets, and that, Nick ends up falling back where he should be in Winnipeg. But curious to know where you think he ends up. Marner, he's really the talisman and kind of the market setter for everyone. So if he goes to Carolina, that's probably going to mean Nick stays out west. If Marner goes to the Western Conference, Tulsky has to be hammering the phones for an Ehlers extension, right? Like, he'd love to bring him in as a free agent. And I think, in lieu of Marner coming in, Ehlers is an amazing second choice. And if you're already willing to pay that much money, surely you're willing to spend on Nick's contract, right? It's not going to be $14 million, not even close, but it'll be pricey. So, it could be a good fit, right? But hopefully that best fit is still in Winnipeg. I'm still holding out, a tiny shred of hope. I know it's probably not going to happen. I really want it to, but it's Ehlers' choice, right? And he has earned that right. He's been one of our best players over the years, and hopefully all of this kind of pans out for him just to be happy wherever it is he ends up. I will say that, with all these big names coming off the board, it would also be beneficial for the Jets if they're looking maybe in the margins. Andrew Mangiapane's out there. You've got maybe Besser if you're trying to figure out if you can salvage him into a cheap deal. Andrei Kuzmenko could be an interesting player if you can find a middle six scorer. Maybe these guys are going to fall through some of the cracks. They're not going to come back to their current teams, and that might be nice for Winnipeg to upgrade their middle six scoring. You could do it for basically free, just using some cap space, and maybe some of these guys wouldn't be that expensive either. So all of this could be a really good summer for the Jets, right? Winnipeg is a patient team, sometimes a little too patient in the past, but here I think patience could really be duly rewarded with some quality names. So a lot to both be concerned about in some ways, but also a little bit excited for. And speaking of excitement, one of the players in our prospect pool that I've quietly called a bit of a wild card, but who's somebody that I think has very intriguing potential, just signed his ELC. That player is Alfons Freij. And I want to chat about what I'm hoping for him and what I hope happens with the overall sort of player that he is in this Jets system, because we all know that guys who are not over 6'2" and who are, not necessarily shutdown defenders don't often get a chance in Winnipeg. I hope Freij is the first person to change that trend. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we're chatting a little bit about the ELC that Alfons Freij just signed. This is awesome for a lot of reasons. Having your prospects under contract is just a great feeling. And I think, especially for an Alphonse, he, for one thing, has already played in Winnipeg as a kid many years ago in some tournaments. But number two, the Jets have always been a so called draft and develop team. But we know that for like the past 7 or 8 years, they've really fallen off the track of what makes that effective. They've brought in a couple of big prospects to become NHLers, but for the most part, this is a very veteran heavy lineup that continues to be a thing over the years. And for the first time in what feels like forever, I think the Jets have realized they're going to have to change their model. I don't know quite if it's going to happen this season. I'm hopeful it is. I thought it was going to be last year. That didn't happen. Winnipeg, won the President's Trophy with their core, but the playoff challenges still presented an issue. And so this is where I think the Jets have a really interesting opportunity. You've got a lot of money coming off the books over the next couple of years. You have some really big decisions. You are still kind of in your cup window right now. And leaning on your youth to supplement really good veterans has always been the model that's really worked the best for a team like Winnipeg. So this is a unique opportunity for the young rookies to step up and really take roster spots. Freij is not going to be one of those guys just yet. Alphonse, I'm very interested to see what he does if he comes overseas. If he joins the Moose, obviously Manitoba has, they've really struggled the past couple of seasons. Last year was just one of the worst years that I can recall from them in a decent bit. Usually during the regular season, they've at least been watchable and pretty decent at times. Last year, though, Morrison just lost the plot completely. I don't know what was going on down there. The offense died. Prospects that are usually big confidence scorers maybe had less than 10 goals. It was ugly, man. Some of the worst hockey that I think the AHL has seen from this Manitoba squad in a good minute, which is unfortunate, right? But I think it also proves the point, a lot of us tend to make, is that the AHL isn't a developmental league. So, you have to treat it like a secondary pro league. And I think for Freij, this could be an interesting opportunity to come help out not only the Moose, but also start to get used to the North American game. He's a relatively smaller defender, 6'1", under 200 pounds. Very fleet of foot for the most part, although, his lateral edge work and stuff still could use some polishing. And he's not the strongest guy in the corners, but kind of like Ville Heinola, which is probably going to trigger at least a little PTSD in some of you. Freij is a very smart skater with a great pass first and offensive mentality. He's very smart at knowing how to get himself out of pressure with the stick more so than just being an elusive skater. That part he also needs to work on, but if he can pass his way out of trouble, I think that that's a really invaluable tool set for how the Jets kind of need to build going forward. Freij is obviously very much a work in progress. The defensive lapses, the gap control, all that stuff, he's still working on that, right? He's a young kid, and it's going to take him time to really get up to speed and figure out how to make the most of those tool sets. I imagine that he'll still spend some time in Sweden before he comes over. I don't think it would be for at least another year or two. I can't imagine that he's going to make the jump from like the junior Swedish leagues to the adult league very quickly and come over to North America. So I don't think he's that imminent, but will be interesting to see what his plan and how the Jets use him is going forward. All I can say is he's one of those guys that you want to put sort of on the back burner for the next 3 or so years. Keep an eye on him. There aren't many prospects in our pool that have the sort of creative tool set, the high level offensive thinking, the confidence to jump into the rush, and sort of the creative tool sets and skills that he has. Now, he doesn't have like Erik Karlsson puck handling or anything. You're not looking at a Cale Makar or even, I guess a Josh Morrissey. Maybe you're looking at more like a Devin Taves or something, right? He'll be a little more simple at times. He's not going to be, the flashiest goal scorer, but he has a great sense of when to shoot, when to make smart passes. You'll see on some of his juniors footage, he knows how to, rebound off the boards effectively to make a great scoring opportunity for the goalie to come over and open the short side for another skater. So it's an intriguing match here, and I hope in broader terms and sort of philosophically that Freij opens the eyes for the Jets to start making more of these smaller skilled prospects part of this team. Now, there are going to be a bunch of you in the comments who are like, he's too small. I always hear that from people both on Twitter and on YouTube. And size is nice to have, but I feel like people sort of overlook it or sort of overvalue it when we're talking about a lot of teams actually being pretty mobile and on the smaller side. Some of the top Stanley Cup winners don't have tremendous size across the lineup. Now, they do have some in some critical positions, but their most effective players are often guys who just skate and move well, right? And if you can sort of outpace the competition and avoid hits and stuff, that's going to go a heck of a lot longer and a much further distance than just being a big slug, right? We don't want that kind of lack of movement and mobility. We have enough of that in Winnipeg's history. We saw guys like Schenn really struggle. You know, they were big guys and they delivered some big hits, but they couldn't actually get the puck out of their own end. And that's where I think the Jets really want to improve. So Freij, you know, I don't know what his future holds. I don't know if he's going to be an NHLer. I'm hopeful that he becomes one and that he becomes one for the Jets specifically. But, you know, this ELC is a nice vote of confidence from the org. It clearly means that they think that his future is going to be, you know, within the next several years. And they do think that he could be a really pivotal part of this Jets future core. So I'm excited for this. I think it should be exciting for all of you in some capacity. And I hope that he can kind of go a little bit further than Heinola ever could. You know, Ville never got the fair shake that I think he deserved. I'm hopeful this time that Freij can kind of change hearts and minds and modernize and help push this Jets team forward. Winnipeg still has a little bit of a mismatch in some of their scouting versus pro scouting departments, but maybe, just maybe, this can be one of the first to really switch those things around and get everyone on the same page. But curious to know how you're feeling about Freij. Are you excited to see him with the Jets? Do you think he'll ever make it? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, I want to chat a little bit about some of the emerging trade rumors. JJ Peterka is on the market, so that's going to be fascinating. That could also change how the Jets play this coming summer, and maybe even whether or not they pursue a Nik Ehlers extension. We'll chat about all of that on tomorrow's episode, but for tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, so have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.